Hey, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm excited. I was just chatting with Joel here before we got. I always really enjoy getting to know people on these podcasts. And this guy, let me tell you, we have not had a guest on this podcast yet that's like him, which is why I'm so excited to have him. He is a 40-year track record in industrial real estate. Now, he co-founded the Epic Savage Realty Partners in 1991. Over there, he hired and mentored over 60 industrial real estate professionals, many of whom became his partners later on. He ended up selling that firm to an international real estate company in 2014, and that's when he started Britt Properties. So he is an industrial real estate broker and owner. Joel secured over 2,000 industrial properties, leases, and sales. His greatest accomplishment is maintaining valued relationships. And dude, you've been doing this for, oh my gosh, 5 decades, 50 years, half a century. Joel, welcome to the show, man. It's great to meet you and have you.
Thanks, Brandon. It's good to be with you.
Yeah.
Just figuring it out. I think I'm double your age. So
are you done? Well, I have a lot to learn from. Believe me, I've had these conversations with guys, and you're the type of person that I love getting to know because you've seen the road ahead. And I don't think I'm a very smart person. I'm just smart enough to realize I need to get myself into those rooms with guys who's already kind of pioneered that way. And I feel like you're that guy, man. So this is awesome.
If I could help you and your audience with 2 or 3 things that have been learning experiences for me over the last 43 years, I'd really like to be able to do that. That would be a value add.
Well, actually, I'm going to hold you to that. So that's going to be our first question that we jump into is like, what would you do if you were my age again? Before we jump into that, though, for those that don't know you really well, give us some context and share your background.
Sure. So I am a real estate broker. I still am. I'm in Illinois. I live in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And in Chicago and in Illinois, the real estate brokerage people take the same test, whether you sell or lease residential, retail, office, industrial. So it's ridiculous, but I have a license where I have to know everything about how to sell a house. I've never sold a house. I sell and lease warehouses instead of regular houses.
Yeah.
And what happened with me is I graduated from college and I went to work for a family business that wasn't my family. And I had 3 mentors over there. And these people were brilliant in real estate. I didn't know anything about industrial. I didn't know at that time that Chicago is probably the best industrial market in the country. We have 1.5 billion square feet. We've got 16,000 industrial buildings. And this family hired me in 1981 when interest rates were 17%. And of their 84 industrial buildings that they had syndicated to hundreds of investors, they had 10 vacancies because business was rough. It was very tough. Inflation was nuts. People were scared to death to move because they thought that would put them out of business. So I went cold calling door to door, and I found tenants for their buildings by going into industrial parks and just having no judgment, being stupid, and being fearless. And that was my combination of things when I was 22. So I'd go knock on a door of a company, and the receptionist at the time, they used to have people who sat in the front, they were receptionists.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, hey, who's the owner of this building? I'd like to talk to them about whether they might want to move down the street to a different industrial building. And back then, I'd say I got into 2 out of every 3 places I stopped in. I wasn't doing it on the phone. I was doing it in person. In the cold weather here in the winter and the hot weather here in the summer. And of the 16,000 industrial buildings here in Chicago, I've probably cold called, walked in the door of at least half of them, which is about 8,000 different places that I've cold called. So in about a 10-year period, I made a bunch of leases and a bunch of sales and made commissions, but I wanted to be an owner and I didn't know how to get over the hump to do my first deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to my boss. Actually, it was a family, a father and a son, Milt Podolsky and Steve Podolsky. And I said, guys, I want to be like you. I want to be a syndicator. And they said, if you go find a deal, we'll put up the first third of the money, but you go find the other 2/3 of the money, and you have to put money in yourself. And I did. I went and I found a property and we bought a 14,000 square foot building in a town called Gurnee, Illinois, about 40 minutes north of downtown Chicago. And I raised money, $20,000 at a time from a group of people. So I had a couple of dozen investors at 20,000 each. And I had to put 20,000 in to have credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked. And then we did another one and that worked. And we did a bunch more. And then we did 70 deals. We bought 70 properties over a period of years. There were 2 downturns. And the second one was 2008. The global financial crisis. It was the global Joel Friedland financial crisis. I had 50 buildings. I had 50 mortgages. I had 250 investors. And I thought I was going to go bankrupt with a bunch of other people who were falling like flies in 2008. Because when Lehman Brothers went out of business and the stock market crashed and real estate went down to almost like 60% of what it was worth the day before, I was in real trouble. And I got into a funk. I got into a depression because I thought I had lost money for all these people. So I worked hard. I took some medications. I got some counseling. And I figured out I had to get back to work. And I went back at it and started rebuilding. I ended up saving the portfolio from bankruptcy because of perseverance. And again, maybe being too dumb to go bankrupt and start over. I just kept pushing to keep it alive. And then the market changed and started getting good. Every year it got better and better after that. And we kept buying properties and I learned my lesson. And what I learned is no debt, no mortgages, no banks, no notes, no lenders. I want people to get into my deals and make money every year, cash flow, no bankruptcies, no foreclosures. And that's what I learned for me. Now, that's not right for most people, but for me, it was right. And so I told my investors I was a new man. I'd learned a lesson. And if anybody wants to go with me as a syndicated investor into an all cash deal, let's go. And interestingly, a bunch of people went in, and they were mostly very wealthy people who owned businesses. That's who they were. They were making a lot of money. They didn't really need to take a lot of risk to make money. They were already entrepreneurial, making money in their business. You know, I'll tell you what's a bunch of bullshit is these guys who say, quit your job and come into real estate and I'll teach you how to make money and not have to work very much anymore. You know, that's such bullshit. The people who invest are the people who make a lot of money, and they invest a lot of money because they're entrepreneurs and they have their own business, or they're a doctor or a dentist, and they make a lot because they work hard and they don't want to lose their money. So they want to go into things that they're going to do well with, and preservation of capital is their number one goal.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. And I agree with you 100%. I think a lot of people focus on the returns and, oh man, you know, the get rich quick stuff, the cryptos, the stock market, buying individual stocks, the Warren Buffett method. And it takes a long time. One, you got to be super right and have some kind of precise knowledge to be really, really uncanny good at it, like Warren Buffett. But most of the time it doesn't work out. And you get these huge losses, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons people don't ever reach financial freedom, or it takes them a long time, is they're not focused on capital preservation, which is why real estate, in my opinion, is such a great vehicle. Is real estate always holds intrinsic value because people need somewhere to put their business. They need something to run out of it. They need somewhere to live. And I really love that, man, you were like the boots on the ground. Like you started in the trenches. And I love that. I've got some door-to-door sales experience too, you know, in my college days. And I think everybody needs to do that, at least for a summer, if they're going to learn sales, because it's such a great way. So you had this foundation when you decided you wanted to be investment? I mean, you knew the market really, really well. I mean, this gave you a huge advantage. And I think that this is probably what led to you being able to pull yourself out of 2008 and 2009. Now, I want to visit that real quick. So 2008, 2009, this catastrophe happened. You said you thought you were going to, lose everybody's money. You took some counseling and you said, you know what, I got to get back to work. And you end up pulling out of that. I think a lot of people, when they're down on their luck or they're going through these phases in their business where things are just not going well, which is going to happen. It's not if, it's when. Like, how did you do that? What did the plan look like? How did you pull yourself out of that funk?
So that's a really interesting question. And the answer to me, and I've studied people who've been in depressions because of business downturns, because of business failures. And the only answer, there's only one answer, and it's work your way out of it. You got to work. You got to get to work. And even though you wake up at, let's say, 2 a.m. and can't sleep, and you're sweating and your palms are sweating and you're anxious because things have been so bad, you get up and you get to work. And I think the key to it is setting really achievable daily goals, and then feeling real good at the end of the day about achieving those really achievable goals. If you set goals that are unrealistic, at the end of the day, you feel like a failure. But if you set realistic goals and then you accomplish them, or maybe even do a little more than that, then all of a sudden you feel better because you're treating yourself. It's called self-care. You're taking care of yourself as opposed to wallowing in disappointment and despair. And it's hard. It's hard to wake up and get to work. And when I was in my depression, I wanted to pull the covers over my head and go back to sleep. I couldn't wait till nighttime because I could escape from the nightmare just by going to sleep.
Yeah.
And my wife was supportive. My partners were supportive. My kids were supportive, but it was very tough. And I can tell you that during the day, there were days where I would go to the office and I was so down and depressed, I would actually lie on the floor in my office and close the door and just lie there trying to recover from just feeling so down and so crappy.
Yeah.
And then I'd get up and I'd sit in my chair and I'd pick up the phone and I'd start calling people. And I think that's the answer. It's you work your way out of a hole. You don't keep digging, and you don't just lie down and pretend that you're dead.
Oh, and the most important thing, it sounds like, is you just need to get some kind of traction. I know for me, whenever I've gotten down in life, it's when I feel like I'm not in control, when things are just happening to me. And that kind of leads me to not take as much action, which creates even more of kind of like this downward spiral. Inaction leads to consequences. Consequences beat you up, which leads to like more inaction. Like you just said, we just got to push through and we got to get some traction. You set some goals. Those goals made you feel like you had some traction. You were able to kind of pick yourself up mentally, and you created this positive feedback loop. I love it. Now you focus on industrial. You focus on, it sounds like, class B and C in the Chicago area. And I'm kind of curious, why Chicago? If somebody was looking to get into industrial, I was like, hey, I'm bullish on this sector. What are some of the fundamentals that you look at that, if, let's say, you weren't going to invest in Chicago, that Chicago has that you would want to copy and paste and repeat?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I have witnessed for decades is that institutions love industrial in Chicago. Here's the reason why. Chicago is a place where you can live much less expensively than in New York or in LA or San Francisco or Austin. It's a reasonable place to live. There's also, for industrial is manufacturing and distribution. So they're warehouses. What I do is I have boxes. They're boxes of various sizes and shapes. 30,000 foot box, 20,000 foot box, 20 foot high ceiling, 16 foot high ceiling. Inside those boxes, what goes on is amazing. People are manufacturing products. People are distributing products. There's service businesses. It's the backbone of our country is the entrepreneurial business. And the people that occupy our buildings are about 80% entrepreneurial, family-owned businesses in many cases, and about 20% corporate. So if you drive down the tollway, you see, let's say, an Amazon, or you see the Costco warehouse, or you see a manufacturer that makes cars, Detroit, those people occupy 20% of the buildings. But I get to deal with entrepreneurs every day that occupy our buildings. We had a tenant that was on Shark Tank in year one. He makes protein bars. He built the business up to an $18 million a year business. Mm-hmm. And he's got 80 employees. And why does he like Chicago? He's from Ohio. He likes it because the population is big enough that there's always someone to fill your building. If you're in real estate, there's always someone to hire if you're a business owner. Mm-hmm. We've got 7 million people. It's a huge population center. It's right where all the tollways meet. It's where all the highways meet. It's the center of the country. So trucking lanes go right through Chicago unless they're going down south. They have to go through Chicago. They can't go above it because there's lakes, the Great Lakes. So they have to go right through Chicago, and that's where the tollways are. And that's where all our buildings are, right off the tollway exits. And we've also got something that almost nobody else has, which is unlimited fresh water out of Lake Michigan, which every food company needs. So we've got thousands of food companies, national and local food companies. We also are a place where there's a tremendous amount of culture. You can go to the opera. I hate opera, but you can go to the opera. You can go to theater. You can see concerts. You got multiple sports teams. So it's a great place to live, except in the winter, it sucks when it's cold, which is when we go to Florida for a little while. But that's why Chicago. So many people are here and want to be here and have to be here. They say, if you can't make it in Chicago in business, you can't make it anywhere. And that's true. And people do well here. So let me give you just a couple examples. We have one tenant who manufactures children's museum exhibits. So as you get a little older, when you're in the family situation, if you get to that point, you're going to take your kid to a children's museum. Everybody knows what they are. They're all over. Every city has one. Every country has them in every city. And this woman and her husband, they're divorced and they own the company together, but she runs it. And they've got about 40 people working in 24,000 square feet. And they pay the rent, and the rent gives us an 8.5 or 9% return. No debt, zero debt. And we don't have to worry about a mortgage. We don't have to worry about if she misses a payment because she had a bad month or something. We feel so safe. And she's always got business. She's always got exhibits that she's building for people out of plastic and wood. It's a workshop. That's what makes Chicago special. It's got every kind of company you can imagine, and ones you couldn't even imagine. Just crazy. Do you know that a lot of restaurants, most restaurants for their kitchens don't own their knives, they rent them?
No, I did not know that.
Chipotle, every week, they chop. Their knives get dull, and they don't have knife sharpeners. So what happens is this company called Cozini, which is in a suburb of Chicago, right near O'Hare Airport, has 60 guys sitting in the back of a warehouse going with the little knives, sharpening them up. And so they come in dull, they get sharpened, and then they go out sharp. And they have all these delivery vans that go to all the restaurants, the steakhouses, and almost any restaurant chain you can think of. They rent their knives around the country from Cozini. That's a 30,000 square foot industrial building.
Wow.
And they pay rent every month because these are not startups. These are real businesses that make literally millions of dollars a year, and we can count on them to pay their rent.
So it sounds like Chicago, one of the biggest driving factors, it sounds, is you just want to be able to have the absorption, right? Whatever you buy or build or whatever, you want to make sure that you've got that population size to absorb that. So you're focused on these heavy major metropolis areas that have the supporting population to make sure that, hey, there's going to be a business for here. Why? There's so many different niches in real estate, and industrial is not something that I've got a broad knowledge on, and I'm very interested in learning more. What made you decide on industrial? What are some of the benefits and advantages of, working with this piece of real estate, as opposed to some of the other ones that are out there?
So we own 15 buildings right now, and our average tenant has been in our buildings for 18 years.
So no tenant turnover. You got to love that.
And every year in most of our buildings, the rent escalates.
Mm.
And when you have a single tenant, it's so easy to manage. Our management isn't simple because when an HVAC unit breaks, we have to deal with how fast we need to get a new air conditioning and heating unit in, because if someone can't run their business because it's cold or it's hot, that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we do help as managers with roof leaks and with sewer problems. The worst thing that happens in our buildings is the parking lots deteriorate every year. And we're constantly chasing, we're patching holes, and we're redoing big sections. When you see cracking, it's called alligatoring in a parking lot. So we have these great big parking lots in our buildings, and we have to make sure that they are tended to. But really, industrial, the coolest thing about industrial is the returns are better than any other asset class in real estate. Multifamily doesn't hold a candle to our returns. Our average return for cash flow, just cash flow, not appreciation, for the buildings that we've been holding for the last, say, 12 years, running about 11%. So we just send out quarterly distributions, 2.75% a quarter. In residential and multifamily, it's running half that. Industrial is riskier because if it's one tenant and it goes vacant, it's 100% vacant. But I deal with a lot of stuff. First of all, I deal with a lot of family issues. Not my family, well, my family too, but almost every big company that stays in business a long time, the grandfather started it, the kids run it, the grandkids are taking over, and they all freaking hate each other. I'm not kidding. 70% of family businesses, they don't have Christmas together. They don't get together for Thanksgiving. They're mad at each other. 30%, they love each other. But 70%, in some cases, I have to actually call two separate family members to get an answer on something about the new lease because they won't talk to each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's a tragedy.
That is, you rent an apartment and let's say it's a couple. When they rent it, they're together. They're not fighting. They're husband and wife or whatever they are, family of three.
Mm-hmm.
They're not fighting. They're happy to get the apartment. Well, when someone stays in a building and their family starts going into generational wealth, there's always resentment and grievances. I've got more brothers who have grievances against their brother, and the sister doesn't work there, and the dad left a third of the business to her. Why does she get anything? So part of industrial, part of the difficult element is dealing with people.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for the people, it would be a really easy business.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses would be a whole lot easier if you didn't have to deal with the people aspect of it. I know exactly what you mean. We deal with a lot of the same stuff, and it's a lot of family inherited property, and you got to bring everyone together, and a lot of them don't get along, and so yeah, you got to play mitigator a lot of the times, but that's what it takes to get the deal done. Now, you said there were some risks involved with industrial, some great benefits. What steps do you take to mitigate those big risks? I know you mentioned one was, hey, you got one tenant. There's not as many tenants out there, like, for an apartment building, there's 7 million people in the city of Chicago. If you're doing a warehouse, it's 30,000 square feet. There's only so many businesses that are that size. What steps, maybe what are some of the other risks out there? And then what steps do you take in your tenure to mitigate those?
So the answer is one answer. It's laser focus. The reason that we only do Chicago, first of all, Chicago is just a big enough industrial town that if every institution wants to be here, if every insurance company wants to own industrial here, there's a reason for it. Mm-hmm. So I feel the same way as they do. I've been here longer than anyone working in any insurance company. And I've been here longer than most of the other 300 industrial real estate brokers. Mm-hmm. So I know occupants and owners of buildings because I'm laser focused on this market. So here's where the mistake happens with some people. The market's good, rents go up, cap rates go down, and someone says, gee, we should move from Chicago and start doing deals in Dallas, and we should start doing Phoenix. And they don't know Phoenix, they don't know Dallas. If this thing's in a bubble, those folks are in trouble because they don't have the depth, bless you, they don't have the depth of relationships in those other places until they're there for a long time. So we know the brokers. For example, if you said to me, Joel, what are you doing now? Well, we're buying 3 buildings in the city on the river. That's what we're doing right now. We just went under contract today to buy 3 buildings. They're occupied by a food manufacturer. They have 3 in a row because as they grew, they didn't want to move because it's too expensive to move, which is, by the way, one of the great things. Our buildings are sticky. Tenants who manufacture can't leave because their employees are too valuable. They don't want to lose them by moving, and their equipment is too expensive to move. So this is a food company that ain't going anywhere. So we're buying the property. There's a 7-year lease for all 3 of the buildings. And what's great about it is I know every building in that neighborhood, and I don't know the buildings in terms of current knowledge from yesterday. I know it from a year ago or 2 years ago. This afternoon, when we're done, I'm taking a ride to those buildings, and I'm going to literally, with my partner and my son, split up the neighborhood and go door to door and find out what every single owner of an industrial building is doing there, and what every single tenant is doing there, and who's there and how they're using the property. And when we're done, which will be the end of the week, because there's probably about 60 places that we have to go, and we have to have meaningful conversations when we stop in. By the way, it's hard for them when we stop in to not see us, because I say, we're buying a building right down the street. I'd like to come in and talk to you about the area. They say, oh, come in, because they think maybe I'll give them information about what their building is worth, or who knows, maybe they'll complain about their brother. Sometimes I'm like more of a psychiatrist than I am a real estate.
Yep.
But we'll learn all about what's happening in that neighborhood. And now we are to this day, expert in that neighborhood. And so that laser focus of just being in one place is really important. We did a deal in Columbus, Ohio, bought a 200,000 foot building with my brother-in-law being the other half. He lived there. Disaster. He didn't know his market laser focused like we know our market. And I assumed that he did. And I assumed if he didn't, that he would learn it. But it wasn't his way of doing things. And then we went and we bought 2 buildings in Florida. And one worked out great because the building next door got wiped out in a hurricane and the tenant had to move into our building forever. So that was just, the building literally was like flooded and almost knocked down. And then we bought another building in Florida in a small town called Ormond Beach. Never buy an industrial building in Ormond Beach because it's too small. And we didn't have anybody there that knew everybody. So someone was going to eat our lunch in a different town. So in Chicago, we know the people, we know the prices, we know the values, and you can put all the pieces together. It's like a puzzle. If you have all the pieces to the puzzle, you can put it together successfully. But if you got a puzzle and you're missing 17 pieces out of 100, it's going to look like you didn't finish the puzzle and it's not going to be successful. And that's our game, is that we get into the details down to the nits and the picks and the littlest things and what the rents are, and literally who died in the neighborhood, what father of in a family that owned a business that manufactures some kind of products for tractors, what father died and who are the kids and who do we need to talk to now? That's how deep we get in.
It sounds like your biggest risk mitigator is your knowledge of the local market. I mean, you know, down to the cent what the rents are, you know, the values of the properties, you know what you need to buy it at to bake in that equity and that margin of safety for yourself and your investors. You know the history of it, and you're actually in the trenches, going to the properties, figuring out what kind of businesses are being run there, you know, what their problems are. You're actively building those relationships, and you've been doing this for so long. You've got your broker status. You've built relationships with the brokers. So if you got you an empty building, you know exactly who to call. You've got a list of people that aren't even tenants. They're lists of people that have lists of tenants. that can potentially fill your buildings so you can get it filled really quick and not have a high vacancy rate.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you a great story. My partner was a fellow named Lou Savage. He was one of my original partners when we started our business and when I left the Podolsky firm. And by the way, the Podolsky firm that I worked at for 10 years, where they were my mentors, Steve Podolsky in his 70s, he's still an investor with me and an advisor with me. So that's another thing, by the way, before I get to the Lou Savage story. I don't make any deals without talking to my 8 advisors on my advisory board. They're the smartest investors in industrial real estate in Chicago. And they invest in all my deals with all the other investors. And I don't make any moves selling, buying, leasing without talking to all 8 of the members of my advisory board. So Lou Savage, when I started out, Lou, you ever hear of a TV show called Boy Meets World?
Yeah.
Or a TV show called The Wonder Years?
Not The Wonder Years, but Boy Meets Girl definitely rings a bell.
So his sons were TV actors. And he lived in Chicago and he was an industrial guy with me. And because his kids kept getting renewed, their TV shows kept getting renewed by the networks, he and his family had to move to LA. And he called me after about 6 months. He said, you know what the big problem is here? I don't know the real estate market in LA like you and I knew it in Chicago. And he said, you know what I miss the most? I used to go to the cleaners to drop off my dirty pants and my dirty shirts. And I'd be at the cleaners. And as I was walking in, Jim would be walking out, and Jim would be the owner of a company that occupies a building in an industrial park near where we live. Hey, Lou, how you doing? Hey, listen, I need a bigger building. And then he'd be walking out and he'd meet Steve, and Steve would be walking in. Hey, Lou, how you doing? Yeah, we're thinking of investing in industrial real estate. I know you've got some properties. He said, I miss going to the cleaners where I would network by accident because I know everybody. He says, in LA, I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
You're so lucky to still be in Chicago. You could go to the cleaners.
You never know who you're going to meet at the cleaners.
Or the grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that caught my attention that's been kind of itching in the back of my mind. And one of the big things you do to mitigate risk is you don't have a lender involved.
Yeah.
That is the risk a lot of times in these things. You know, you can hold real estate for forever. It'll eventually catch up. You can make all the mistakes in the world. You can buy it for 200% of what it's worth. And if you're able to hold it long enough, eventually inflation will erase any consequences of your decisions. But that's a pretty big factor. You don't have a lender involved. You don't have someone that, hey, you know, you miss a few months, they can foreclose on you. You don't have someone that you can just call the note due for any reason other than they're experiencing a, you know, economic catastrophe like in 2008, 2009, but you're still able to deliver these returns. I know a big part about being able to deliver, you know, healthy, you know, anywhere between, you know, 14, 16, all the way up to, you know, some of these 24% IRR deals, whether it's new development or buying existing, you know, multifamily. How a big part of that is being able to leverage the capital, right? You raise money, you syndicate deals, and you raise the equity and what you need, and then that money is then used to go get cheaper bank money. And as a result of the leverage of investors' capital, that's where you're able to pay those higher IRRs. But you only do, it sounds like, pretty much 100% equity or 100% partnerships where there's no bank involved. How are you still able to produce these attractive returns?
Knowing the market. We know the market. We see the opportunities when they come up, and we swoop in and we buy a building that we think's in a great location that has a good future for appreciation. Our average IRRs is about 14%. And I heard you say something on a podcast I was listening to you when I was working out last week. You were talking about Warren Buffett and the snowball. You remember that? Was that you?
Yeah. Lessons learned from Warren Buffett. Yeah, I finished reading.
And one of his big lessons was never lose money. If you don't lose money, you're going to do much better than if occasionally you get into something so risky that you lose money. So I heard you say that as being one of the tenets that you believe in. And that's what I believe in too. It's don't lose money. Well, if you have debt and the market goes bad or rates go up, you could be in the position I was in 2008, which is miserable. It's just miserable. So we're the only people that we know who do all cash, no debt deals. It's not for everybody. And I would never recommend that someone put all their money with me. I like diversification of investment. But if someone wants to have what's called safe money that they know is going to be there, we're not going to lose it to a lender, and there's going to be consistent cash flow because we know our market and we buy the right buildings. The appreciation on a building like that, if it's in the right location, should be between 5 and 7% a year. Mm-hmm. So if you're making an average on a 15-year hold of 9% cash on cash as your cash flow, and you're making 6% on appreciation, you're at 15. I've got a margin of error to be at 14. We bought some buildings in what we thought was the path of development, and we paid $3 million for one and $1.5 million for the other. We leased one ready to the U.S. Postal Service for a warehouse, and we leased the other one to a guy who baked bread. The value of those buildings, because of what happened in the neighborhood, in the city, tripled over the last, we bought it in 2007. So what would that be? 16 years. It's tripled. So that 4 million is now worth 12 million. So on paper, we've got 8 million more, and we've been making cash flow the whole time. That doesn't happen on every deal. I can tell you that there are deals where we make zero return because there's vacancy. Because our number one risk is vacancy, our number two risk is vacancy, and our number three. But if we have no mortgage, we can cover the vacancy with staying power.
Yeah.
And not worry about sleeping at night.
Yeah. Yeah. Just postpone distributions till you get somebody in there. And with your background and experience in relationships, I mean, that seems to be that there's something beautiful when you know what your main risk is, and it's your first, second, and third risk, right? It's all the main risk where you can pour all your time and resources into mitigating that risk. And it sounds like that's what you've done.
Yeah. And the 8 advisors on my advisory board, they make one of them is turned 96. I went to his birthday party last night at Ruth's Chris. He turned 96. He's been in real estate. He's got a family portfolio of real estate of over $100 million, let's say. He's the greatest guy in the world. He's just so knowledgeable and a great mentor to me. And he's on my board of advisors. Yesterday, he was telling me about a deal I looked at, and I told him about it. He says, I don't like that neighborhood. Don't do it. So there's a deal we're looking at that we may not do because Nate didn't like it. And Steve Podolsky, I mean, he's been doing this for 45 years. Whatever he says, I listen to it intently. He and his wife and my wife and 2 other investors, a husband and wife, went out to dinner last week. And it didn't turn to business until the very end. And I told him about the same deal that I told Nate about. And Steve said, I don't like the neighborhood. So if Steve doesn't like it and Nate doesn't like it, I'm listening.
Enough said. Leveraging other people's experience.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, man, this has been such a really interesting conversation. I feel like I've done a deep dive on industrial. If people want to learn more about industrial, if they want to learn more about you, where can they connect?
Sure. They can learn about our new deal, which are the 3 industrial buildings that have the food company over by the Chicago River in the city, by going to BritProperties.com. That's BRIT, 1T, properties. The company is named after one of our property managers. When I started the company, when I sold my old company to Transwestern, we started Brit, and I needed a name, and our property manager's name was Brad. So I said, let's call it Brit. Brad really is terrific. You're naming the company after the property manager? I said, that's how good you are.
That's the best compliment a property manager can receive.
How about that? He goes to people and he says, hey, you need a new roof, but the company's named after me.
Cool. We'll make sure that is posted in the show notes here. Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
I just think real estate's such an outstanding business, but it's not a get rich quick business. It's a get rich slow business, and it's just being patient and knowing your stuff cold. It's knowing what you're doing. That's the only thing that I can say is the most important. Is if you bumble around and you bounce from one thing to another and you don't know what you're doing, somebody else will eat your lunch.
Yep. 100% words from the wise. Well, we appreciate you coming on today. This has been an absolute pleasure. And, hopefully we can continue to keep in touch. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.